welcome back to Pop Culture Roulette and Media Pod Smash productions of Horror Through the Decades. We're going to tackle the 90s. So, as we discussed on previous episodes, I picked movies based off of one every year from the 78 to 88 to 98 on forward. So this is our 1998 segment. We're going to do The Faculty. It was released on December 25th, 1998. So, just in there. Almost didn't make the cut, but it did. This was directed by Robert Rodriguez. So, kind of a heavy hitter name there. He's coming off of Desperado and From Dusk Till Dawn. So he's not really like a well-known... Like, he's got the name from El Mariachi and from Desperado, but like he doesn't have quite the name he has now. This is one of the few movies that I think he did that he didn't write or have a lot more to do with the production of. It's a very interesting because it doesn't even really look like a Robert Rodriguez film, but this is one of his earlier movies. It's written by Kevin Williamson, who had already done Scream 1 and 2, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Dawson's Creek was starting around the same time. You definitely feel more of a Kevin Williamson influence in this movie. Scripting, pacing, the way the characters interact with each other than I feel like you get the Robert Rodriguez. And we'll talk about that, obviously, as we go along. But Scream, like, you definitely get kind of a Scream influence from this movie. Your key actors, you've got Jordana Brewster, who, this is her first movie, surprisingly. You've got Clea Duvall, who had a bit of a career before that. Josh Hartnett, this is early in his career. This is also when they were really trying to push Josh Hartnett to be somebody. Laura Harris, who's gone on to have quite a TV career. Sean Hatosi, who has become a that guy. Usher. Basically, this is his first film role. But it's basically just barely more than an extended cameo for Usher. Doesn't really face into this movie very much. And then Elijah Wood, who clearly has eclipsed all of them. We have The Faculty. You have Selma Hayek, Famke Janssen, Piper Laurie, Bebe Neuwirth, Jon Stewart, and Daniel von Bargen. Now, Daniel von Bargen is one of those guys that as soon as you see him, you're like, oh. In fact, to give you your that's where I was. Remember back to Seinfeld when George was working for the stone writing company and he had the boss who was just like, I don't care. That's him. He is in everything. You see him, you hear him, you're like, oh, that guy. He's still doing that guy today in as much as that he was doing it then. Like, he's just, for whatever reason, he's never gotten the top line bill, but guarantee you he's done quite well for himself. So we open with a movie and Robert Patrick, who should have been on the teacher list, but for some reason was not. Robert Patrick, a.k.a. T-1000, among many, many other things. But he's the football coach, and man, is he giving it. He's going to show up a couple times in this movie, giving us some of the just over-the-top, just juicy, chew the scenery. He showed up to have fun. He does not take away an opportunity to really overact in this movie. We got a couple cameos that hang out in this movie. We'll get to them. Danny Masterson, Harry Knowles, who maybe doesn't have quite the name he does now, but back then that was a pretty big thing, and we'll get to him later on. And Christopher McDonald, a.k.a. Shooter McGavin, playing basically the same character as Elijah Wood's dad. This movie, they've decided to set it in Ohio because why not? It starts off like you don't really know what's going on. Robert Patrick, who was the high school, who is the football coach, all of a sudden is now attacking Baby Newworth, the high school principal. You're like, is this a slasher? What is going on here? Then Piper Laurie, who I don't really know where I know her from. She's just an older actress who shows up in a lot of stuff. You think she's there to, like, she's gonna save Baby Newworth, but then there's a twist, and she helps. Now, this is the beginning of the movie where we decide it's not. It's sort of Kevin Williamson ripping off his own self from Scream into The Faculty. Josh Hartnett is your cliche slacker, who also happens to be the super genius, who happens to, be the whatever. Elijah Wood is your cliche nerd. Clea Duvall is your cliche loner, like she's the hipster loner. Jordana Brewster is your head cheerleader or head bitch, You get to your Hyde cameo 11 minutes into the movie, and he must have been either like on the way to the set of that 70s show or just come from the set of that 70s show, because he's got the Hyde haircut, the Hyde, like everything is like early that 70s show Hyde. So we get introduced to the teachers after we've got the introduction of the characters. Famke Janssen is trying to be this super shy, mousy, not super, you had her just before this in GoldenEye, where she was Xena Onatopp, the sex pot James Bond, Bond girl, and then here, she's all like, it's trying to play against type, but you can tell like it's just a little bit too far. Like it's because, first off, a teacher that looks like that's not teaching in Ohio, but so basically, we're sitting, we're just a lot of cliche happens in this movie. It's very kind of standard cookie cutter. Now, this is where it does start to kind of deviate from it, because about 20 minutes into the movie, Elijah Wood discovers something that leads us to believe, or leads us to go from this was a slasher movie to something else. He finds a little pod on the football field. He takes it to the teacher of John Stewart, who's the biology science teacher, and they start looking around at the pod, and that's also when we now learn that Josh Hartnett is also some kind of super genius that all the teachers just have some sort of like begrudging respect for. Now, remind you, this is high school, not college, so it's a little, out of place, but they throw it in some water because there's a random just fish tank full of water in the class with no fish in it. And then it immediately becomes some sort of creature, and it starts biting people. So now we are in this section of the movie where we are at a pool. Now, every high school movie in the 90s, or even now, has a pool. I don't know about you guys. My high school never had a pool. Nobody who I've ever really talked to has had a high school with a pool. But for some reason, every movie has a high school with a pool. Anyway, foreshadowing, we're coming back to that later. There's the hallmark of the 90s teen movies here. The soundtrack. You've got The Offspring, Creed, Soul Asylum, Garbage, Stabbing Westward, Sheryl Crow, Sean Mullins, Oasis, a band that wanted to be bigger than it ever did, Nev. That was one of your hallmarks of the 90s movies, is that it had a super cool soundtrack. And that really plays heavily in the movie. like when you just, all the music happening in the background. There's a good chance in my boxes of CDs I probably have this soundtrack. I'm kind of surprised. I'd be shocked if I don't. Um, so we've moved on. We've clearly discovered that there's some sort of alien infecting everybody. The teachers have all been infecting each other. And now, so we have Elijah Wood and Jordana Brewster end up in the teacher's lounge closet, and they overhear a couple of the teachers making the plans, where Selma Hayek now comes in and gets immediately infected by Robert Patrick. The kids run off, and they run and tell the cops, which is a rarity in these kinds of movies, because normally they're like, we can't go to the cops, nobody will believe us. But they do, and all they end up doing is getting the cops infected by the aliens. So now all of the faculty have been turned. We now know that a couple of the cops have been turned. So the students, the faculty now start working on the students. And we still don't really know what's going on. We just know that they're infected with something, and that everybody who's infected just becomes obsessed with water. They must drink water at all time. It's weird. I don't understand it, but it happens. Now all of a sudden, as the group is finally kind of coalescing and coming together, the group that we talked about earlier, the named actors. If you don't have a name, you've become infected, and you're just one of the nameless, rabble-rousing alien people. The loner, who had been pretending to be a lesbian to protect herself, and you're using the lesbian thing as just a way to like keep people away from her because she didn't want friends, all of a sudden is in love with the quarterback, who had quit the team because he didn't want to be the quarterback anymore. And also doesn't look like a quarterback. He looks like the water boy or the place kicker at best. But that's another topic. But it takes up until that point for all the main cast. Now all the main cast is getting together because you've had a couple of them over here and a couple of them over here, and now they're all kind of finally realizing that they're the only ones not infected. And they're on the run. In fact, we're actually almost an hour into the movie before the whole main cast is on the run. We see them attack Jon Stewart. They jam a pin into his eye. They cut some fingers off. With some really dated CGI. CGI does not hold up in this movie as well as the practical effects did in Killer Clowns. I mean, Killer Clowns, obviously, as we discussed in our last segment, was fun and practical. This one, they tried to do a lot more CGI, and I don't know if it's because the technology of the late 90s just wasn't there where it is now, or 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when we look back at the movies and we're like, wow, that movie looked really good, we're going to be like, man, that movie looked like shit. So now we've all got together. We're in Josh Hartnett's garage where he's some sort of super genius. We now have the plan of Josh Hartnett's also a drug dealer. It's important to know, but it's a drug that he created himself. That also happens to be, as they discovered by jamming Jon Stewart in the eye with a pin that happened to be full of the drugs, because that's how he sells the drug, full of empty pins. Kills the alien. Just his perfect blend also happens to magically be the cure to killing the alien. So they determine, because it's some sort of infestation, if they kill the queen, all the rest of them will die. I don't know. There's nothing that leads you to this determination other than they just go, well, that must be what it is. So they also realize that they can't trust each other. So they all have to take the drug to prove that each other is not infected, which is where we learn that Jordana Brewster was infected. Oh. So now we're down a member of the group, and we go on from there. They decide that the principal, because she's the principal, no other reason than that, must be the queen. Like, no, not like, who was the first infected? Who's been acting the craziest longer? They just go, well, she's the principal. She must be the queen. So they run to the high school, they trap her in the gym, and they kill her. Which does do nothing. Because she's clearly not the queen. Because we all know it has to be somebody before even Robert Patrick, because, you know, he was the first one to go crazy, but somebody got to him first. Now, the quarterback who had quit, he's now infected, so he's part of it. So we're losing members of the group. We're down to Super Genius, Josh Hartnett, which is probably something that's never been said to him. Elijah Wood and a couple of the other kids. Famke Janssen, who has been also been infected, goes full sex pot and tries to get with Josh Hartnett, and there's a car wreck and her head goes flying off, and again the CGI. We also now learn that Laura Harris, the little blonde girl who's been kind of doing nothing the whole movie, she's the southerner who just moved into town the day before. We probably should have talked about her other than just mentioning her name a long time ago, but we didn't, because she's really been nothing and sort of inconsequential until this exact moment where all of a sudden you learn that she's also infected, but somehow managed to take the drug and not... Oh, wait a minute. The girl who just showed up is the queen. Also, for some reason, all of a sudden she's naked. Which is how we discover that she's the queen. Clay Duvall gets infected, so now we're just down to Elijah Wood and Josh Hartnett. A naked queen is now chasing Elijah Wood around, changes to her giant alien form, which is some sort of weird bug creature. It's, I don't know, that CGI works a little better, but it's still, Elijah Wood, the nerd, becomes the hero of the day. He manages to kill the queen, and everybody immediately goes back to not being infected, because they were right. They were 100% right that if you kill the queen, the rest of everybody just goes back to normal. So the movie goes on to say 1 month later, and everybody is moved on with their lives, and everybody's better. But of course, nobody believes the story, and the cops and the FBI have all been investigating, and the teachers that were dead, they're clearly some sort of cult or something happened, and they're all on the run. It wasn't very good, quite honestly. Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 55 in the critic, and the audience 55. I can live with that. That seems about right. It's just, right down the middle. IMDb had it at 6.5, which is a little higher than I thought it should. Clearly the movies that came after were heavily involved from it. The movies, it took heavily from other movies. Some of the most, it stole heavily from Scream, and The Craft, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, The Haunting, Idle Hands, Final Destination franchise. I think the Final Destination franchise actually stole heavily from this movie, in the way that it sets itself up. Now, granted, Final Destination isn't about aliens, it's about, death, but you can see in the way that they kind of build the structure of the movies, I think that it really, kind of stole heavily from it. One of the more interesting things about it is that we talked about there was a cameo by a guy named Harry Knowles. Now, those of you that are a little younger might not remember who he is, but in the early nascent days of the internet, there was a website called Ain't It Cool News. He was one of your first, big time bloggers. He was kind of a personality. He broke a lot of stories. He was just a guy who founded a blog and talked about internet. Basically did what we do now. Podcast, Instagram, and Facebook. But he figured out how to monetize it before a lot of other people. He was friends with Robert Rodriguez, and Robert Rodriguez put him in the movie just as a quick cameo as one of the teachers. Now, on the set, because this guy was plugged in, and because people would give him news, and because he was cool, he had heard about Peter Jackson getting ready to film this little movie in New Zealand called Lord of the Rings. Elijah Wood had not really been either interested or not had heard about it until Harry Knowles was on set going, "Hey, buddy," and said, "Hey, you should," I didn't say he should look into it, but Elijah Wood found out that Peter Jackson was doing Lord of the Rings from Harry Knowles on the set of this movie. Had he not done The Faculty, who knows if Elijah Wood ends up in one of the better trilogies that we've ever had. I don't know. I'm only going to give this movie to you know what? I'm going to do the exact thing that Rotten Tomatoes did. I'm going to go right in the middle. 2.5. So, you've been here for Horror Through the Decades. Come back next time.